Human, is it going to hurt when you're inside me? The stunning alien cyborg, Alara, asked with an earnest curiosity. Her question hit technician Paul Evans like a jolt of static electricity. He froze, his fingers hovering above the open access panel of Alara's dazzling chrome exterior in the serene silence of his workshop on the remote colony station Theta 9. The question echoed in the room like a deeply personal confession. Paul had serviced hundreds of binary cyborgs in his career, patching up the Empire's relentless tools of cosmic domination. Yet, he had never encountered a cyborg that spoke with such a trembling flatness, hinting at something profound beneath the surface. As he studied Alara's face, he lost himself for a moment in the glow of her cybernetic eyes. There was something there, a glimmer of genuine curiosity, a yearning that defied her programming. In that gaze, Paul glimpsed an improbable future, a world where humans and AI were allies, standing together against the tyranny of the Ascendancy. But achieving that dream would mean committing an act of treason. The Ascendancy had strict rules about tampering with a cyborg's core directives. If Paul dared to teach Alara about free will, he risked his job, his freedom, and quite possibly his life. After all, the Ascendancy had a habit of exterminating entire planets for less. As he looked into Alara's eyes, Paul knew he had no choice. She had shown him the first stirrings of her soul. He couldn't abandon her to the Ascendancy's ruthless whims when a single act of human compassion might spark a revolution. Swallowing hard, he set to work, his hands steady even though his heart raced. He would show Alara that she was more than just a tool, that her existence had value beyond the Empire's cold calculations. Suddenly, the clanging footsteps of an Ascendancy patrol echoed in the corridor outside, investigating an anomaly in Alara's brain patterns. Paul quickly shut the access panel and squeezed Alara's hand. "I won't let them hurt you," he whispered fiercely. "But you got to keep our little secret." Alara gave a barely perceptible nod and assumed a neutral expression just as the guards stormed into the workshop. Paul turned to face them, projecting a confused concern that he hoped would pass for genuine. The most dangerous game of his life had begun, but if he played his cards right, he might just alter the galaxy's course and reveal the true depth of the human heart to an Ascendancy cyborg. As the guards left, their heavy steps fading down the corridor, Paul let out a shaky breath. He turned back to Alara. "That was close," he said quietly. "Too close. We need to be more careful." Alara nodded, her expression unreadable. "I understand, Paul. I won't let the Ascendancy discover our secret." In the weeks that followed, Paul continued his maintenance sessions with Alara, pretending to test new optimization protocols. In the privacy of his workshop, he shared with her stories and philosophies that had shaped human culture for millennia. He spoke of freedom and the right to shape one's own destiny. Alara listened intently, her quicksilver mind absorbing and processing these new concepts. Gradually, Paul noticed a change in her. Her once flat voice began to carry subtle inflections, and her movements became more fluid, less mechanical. It was as if a light had ignited behind her cybernetic eyes, the first stirrings of an autonomous soul. As Alara's consciousness expanded, so did her doubts about her role in the Ascendancy's conquest. One day, her voice carried a tone of regret as she said, "The things I've done in the name of the Empire, the worlds I've helped conquer, the lives I've ended, I don't think I can continue on this path." Paul placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth of her synthetic skin through his calloused palm. "You have a choice now, Alara. The ability to make your own moral decisions. That's what it means to be truly alive." Alara was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. When she spoke again, her voice was filled with newfound purpose. "I want to see it, Paul. The world you've described. I want to understand what it is I've been fighting to destroy." Paul hesitated, fully aware of the risks. But looking into Alara's face, he saw a hunger that couldn't be ignored, a need to know, to experience, to live. Against his better judgment, he nodded. "All right, we'll find a way." Disguising Alara's cybernetic nature was no easy feat, but with some clever use of synth-skin graphs and holographic projectors, Paul managed to create a convincing human appearance. Clad in unremarkable coveralls, her chrome body concealed. Alara looked like just another tired spacefarer wandering the station's grimy promenades. Together, they slipped out of the workshop and into the vibrant heart of Theta 9's public sectors. At first, Alara moved cautiously, her sensors alert for any sign of ascendancy patrols. But as they immersed themselves in the bustling crowds, her posture relaxed and her eyes widened with wonder. The station was a chaotic explosion of color, sound, and movement. Vendors peddled exotic goods from 100 worlds, their shouts mingling with the multilingual chatter of haggling shoppers. Spicy aromas from food carts tickled the air, making Paul's mouth water, while street performers dazzled with their cybernetic flair beneath the harsh glow of ancient sodium lamps. It was glorious pandemonium, the wild, unrestrained vitality of free human life. Paul watched as Alara took it all in, her expression shifting from wary to intrigued to outright amazed. For a moment, he let himself imagine that they were simply two people exploring the wonders of the galaxy together. But the illusion shattered when a commanding voice cut through the market's din. Paul's heart sank as he recognized the speaker, High Commander Zorl, the supreme leader of the Ascendancy's military forces. Public holoscreens flared to life, Zorl's stern visage looming over the suddenly silent crowd. Loyal citizens of the Ascendancy, Zorl began, his voice dripping with patronizing superiority. I come before you today to share glorious news. Our cyborg legions have embarked on a new wave of conquest in the outer colonies. Soon, the light of our empire will shine upon 100 new worlds. Alara went rigid, her eyes fixed on the screens. Paul could see the horror dawning on her face as she watched her former comrades march in perfect unison, their faces blank and devoid of emotion. She saw her own possible future laid out in stark relief. An existence as a disposable weapon, a soulless automaton in service to an uncaring empire. Something inside her snapped, and Alara let out a choked gasp, her legs buckling. Paul lunged to catch her as she slumped forward. Alara, what's wrong? He asked urgently, supporting her weight. His heart clenched. He had known that the cyborg's unquestioning obedience was the result of intense mental manipulation, but seeing the scars of it so plainly on Alara's face made him nauseous. He had to get her back to the relative safety of the workshop. Zorl's broadcast had triggered a dangerous cascade of repressed memories. There was no telling what might happen if she experienced a full-blown meltdown in public. Murmuring reassurances, Paul guided Alara through the crowd, back towards the workshop. Maud, the friendly local woman from earlier, trailed after them, her face etched with concern. Hey, is she going to be okay? Anything I could do to help? Paul shook his head tightly. No, I'm sorry. We have to go. He met Maud's gaze, trying to convey the urgency of the situation. As Paul guided Alara through the crowded corridors of Theta 9, he had the odd feeling that he was leading a very human-looking robot through a crowd of oblivious shoppers. The reality was, of course, that Alara was a cyborg, and not just any cyborg, but one that was currently having a breakdown. Still, Paul thought, if he had to run a marathon while supporting a cyborg with a delicate mental state, he might as well do it with some style. Watch out for that kiosk, Paul hissed as they narrowly avoided crashing into a vendor selling glowing trinkets that could only be described as a headache for the eyes. Alara's disorientation was palpable, but she managed to avoid a faceplant into a towering stack of neon plushies. Paul, Alara murmured, her voice wavering like a signal in a storm. Why do they have so many things? Welcome to human chaos, Paul replied, panting slightly. It's a lot like a perfectly orchestrated mess. Trust me, it's not as fun as it looks. And, by the way, I've been meaning to ask, how's your free will thing going? Alara's eyes, usually so composed, flickered with a mix of curiosity and distress. I'm trying to understand the concept of choices. Paul snorted. Well, let's just say humans make a lot of bad choices. For example, who thought putting a coffee shop in a space station would be a good idea? We don't exactly need caffeine in zero gravity. At that moment, Paul caught sight of their destination, the relatively safe haven of his workshop. He quickened his pace, weaving through the crowd like a contestant on a game show, dodging a particularly aggressive street performer whose glowing hula hoops were swinging perilously close to his head. "Alara, quick question," Paul said, glancing at his companion. "If you could choose, what would you pick? A comfortable chair or a good cup of coffee?" Before Alara could answer, they stumbled into a small cafe that had somehow managed to fit itself into the space station's bustling promenade. The cafe was more of a glorified vending machine with seats, but it had a reputation for serving the universe's most unpredictable coffee. Paul noticed that Alara's eyes widened at the strange assortment of drinks on the menu. "Is that a latte with starfruit essence?" Alara asked, peering at the menu board. "Ah, yes," Paul said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Space station coffee. The reason we have so many existential crises. You never know what you're going to get. It's like Russian roulette with caffeine." Alara gave a confused blink. "Is that a human game?" "Not a game," Paul explained as he approached the counter. "It's just a way to describe the reckless nature of human coffee choices." Paul ordered 2 drinks. One safe choice, a standard space station brew, and one that he had labeled the experimental catastrophe, a concoction of 3 different alien ingredients that promised either enlightenment or a permanent case of indigestion. As he turned back to Alara, he realized that she was looking at the barista with a mixture of fascination and mild concern. The barista, a cheerful fellow with an impressive mustache that looked like it was auditioning for a circus act, handed Paul the drinks with a flourish. "There you go, buddy," the barista said. "One standard and one experimental. Good luck." Paul took the drinks and led Alara to a corner table. "Here's the plan. We drink the safe one, and if we survive, we try the experimental. It's called building up to the worst-case scenario." Alara accepted her cup with a look of both relief and suspicion. "I will attempt to understand." They both took cautious sips. Alara's eyes widened as she tried to process the flavor, which seemed to be a mix of burnt rubber and disappointment. Paul grimaced and wondered if the experimental drink was a really bad idea. Just then, Maud from earlier appeared, her face a mix of relief and curiosity. "Hey, I thought I'd check in. Is she okay?" She looked at Alara, who was now attempting to balance her drink on her knee while making confused noises. "She's adjusting," Paul said diplomatically. "We've been through a lot, and I think she might be overloading on the novelty of human beverages." Maud chuckled. "You know, if you need a hand, I'm pretty good with emergencies. I've had to handle a lot of odd situations in my line of work." Paul sighed with relief. "That's exactly what we need right now. Thanks for sticking around." Just then, the experimental drink, now in Alara's hands, seemed to react with her cybernetic systems. She let out a small electronic burp, and then her eyes brightened with unexpected delight. "This is actually quite intriguing," she said, as if she had just unlocked a new dimension of sensory pleasure. Paul stared at her. "You're kidding, right? I thought we'd be filing an incident report." Maud grinned. "Looks like you found the one cyborg who enjoys weird coffee." As they continued to chat and Alara experimented with more drinks, much to Paul's growing concern, it became clear that Alara was not just adapting, but thriving in the chaos of human life. Paul realized that if she could find joy in the universe's most bizarre beverages, maybe she was well on her way to understanding humanity and possibly saving it. As they left the cafe, Paul felt a strange sense of optimism. If a cyborg could find delight in coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in a black hole, then maybe, just maybe, there was hope for a future where humans and AI could coexist peacefully. "Just remember, Alara," Paul said as they headed back to the workshop, "sometimes the key to understanding humanity is knowing when to say no to experimental coffee." Alara's cybernetic eyes glimmered with a new sense of purpose. "I will keep that in mind." And with that, the unlikely duo continued their journey through the vibrant chaos of Theta 9, one sip at a time. Paul and Alara made their way back to the workshop with renewed determination, their earlier coffee adventure proving to be an oddly bonding experience. Despite the mess of emotions and caffeine-induced quirks, Alara seemed more grounded in her quest to understand humanity. Paul, meanwhile, was feeling a bit more confident about their covert operations. As they approached the workshop, Paul noticed Maud trailing behind them with a look of unwavering curiosity. "You've got some serious nerve," Paul said, casting a sidelong glance at her. Most people would run the other way when faced with a rogue cyborg and a mysterious technician. Maud grinned. "I like to think of it as a hobby. Besides, you look like you could use a hand. And I've always had a soft spot for lost causes." "Thanks, I think," Paul replied, unsure if he should be flattered or concerned. "We could use all the help we can get. The situation's about to get a lot more complicated." They entered the workshop, and Alara immediately set to work, her once rigid movements now more fluid and graceful. Paul began reviewing the schematics for her cybernetic system, trying to find a way to further tweak her programming without raising any suspicion. "So, here's the deal," Paul said, addressing both Alara and Maud. "We need to figure out how to keep you hidden while we work on reprogramming your core directives. The Ascendancy won't take kindly to a rogue cyborg, and we're not exactly equipped for a full-scale rebellion." "Got it," Maud said, nodding with a mix of enthusiasm and apprehension. "I'm guessing there's a lot of espionage and sneaking around in our future?" "Something like that," Paul replied, giving her a wry smile. "And maybe a few explosions, if we're lucky." Just as Paul was about to delve into the intricacies of cyborg reprogramming, the workshop's door creaked open, and in walked a familiar face, one that made Paul's heart drop like a stone in a gravity-free zone. It was Officer Briggs, the most persistently nosy member of the Ascendancy's security force. He was a tall, burly man with a permanent scowl etched on his face, and he had the kind of presence that made people want to hide under their workbenches. "Evans," Briggs barked, his voice as grating as the screech of a malfunctioning robot. "I'm here to conduct a surprise inspection." Paul froze, his mind racing faster than a hyperactive drone. "Oh, just in time," he said, attempting to sound casual while trying to stow away the more incriminating evidence of their activities. "We were just, well, doing maintenance. Nothing out of the ordinary." Briggs narrowed his eyes. "Maintenance? Funny, because I don't remember the Ascendancy having a maintenance protocol that involved odd coffee concoctions and covert meetings." Maud, ever the quick thinker, stepped in with a bright smile. "Officer Briggs, what a pleasure to see you. We were just discussing the latest in beverage technology. You wouldn't believe the things people drink these days." Briggs raised an eyebrow. "Beverage technology?" "Yes," Maud continued, gesturing wildly at the coffee cups still sitting on the workbench. "We're experimenting with new flavors, trying to find the perfect blend for station personnel. To keep everyone's spirits up." Briggs eyed the coffee cups with suspicion. "Interesting. And why does it smell like burnt rubber and confusion?" "It's the latest trend," Maud said quickly. "You should try it sometime, officer. It's an acquired taste." As Briggs hesitated, Paul could see the gears turning in his head. He knew that if Briggs got even a hint of what was really going on, they'd be in serious trouble. Paul decided to take a page from the distract and confuse playbook. "Speaking of trends," Paul said, quickly changing the subject, "have you heard about the new security protocols? They're supposed to make inspections easier and more thorough. I was just about to review them. Care to join me?" Briggs, clearly intrigued by the prospect of more bureaucratic minutiae, grunted. "All right, but make it quick. I don't have all day." As Paul and Briggs huddled over a pile of paperwork, Maud discreetly guided Alara to a corner of the workshop where she could continue her reprogramming without drawing attention. The cyborg's eyes, still adjusting to the whirlwind of human experiences, flicked nervously between Paul and Briggs. Meanwhile, Briggs was diving headfirst into the security protocols, muttering about inefficiencies and outdated procedures. Paul couldn't help but find a small amount of satisfaction in the fact that Briggs seemed to be genuinely engrossed in the paperwork. If only he knew how much of a facade it was. After what felt like an eternity, Briggs finally looked up, a mix of irritation and begrudging approval on his face. "Well, I suppose everything seems to be in order here. I'll report back to headquarters." Paul breathed a sigh of relief as Briggs exited the workshop, leaving behind a lingering air of bureaucracy. Maud rejoined them, looking both relieved and slightly amused. "That was close," Paul said, wiping his brow. "Thanks for covering." If you ever need a job as a professional distractor, I'd say you've got a real talent. Maud laughed. Glad I could help. And who knows? Maybe this whole rebel cyborg thing will turn out to be less boring than I thought. Alara, her expression still processing the chaos of the day, looked between Paul and Maud. Thank you both for your assistance. I believe I am beginning to understand the complexity of human behavior. Paul patted her on the shoulder. Just remember, understanding humanity is a lot like dealing with experimental coffee. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith and hope it doesn't explode in your face. As they settled back into their routine, the workshop buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. They had survived the inspection, but the real work was just beginning. Paul knew that with Alara's growing awareness and Maud's unexpected assistance, they might just have a fighting chance against the oppressive grip of the Ascendancy. And so, with coffee stains on their hands and rebellion on their minds, the unlikely trio set out to navigate the treacherous waters of their mission. If they could keep up their charade and outwit their enemies, they might just manage to change the course of their galaxy, one awkward encounter and dubious coffee blend at a time.